Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, fine. How are you today?
Good.
Hmm.
Give you some credit, and we'll wait a couple of minutes for other people to show up,
Alrighty.
including our speaker.
Mhm.
Looks like you're doing well. I was just looking at your first two articles where you got A's.
Yeah, yeah. And then I even turned in the third one or the second one that was supposed to be due after spring break before spring break. So I think I'm maintaining a fine pace. So that's
Yeah,
good.
I think so too.
Hmm.
I guess I caught that on the recording, but I guess it won't. You don't mind, do you, that I said you're
No.
doing well?
Oh no, I don't mind at all.
Okay.
Is, is that assignment due for the due yet? Are we on to
The
the next?
third, so we're just going to start on our third assignments now.
Okay.
So it's not due, just sort of coming up with an idea.
Right, right.
Let me just look at my email real quick and make sure nobody's trying to reach me, such as Alee.
Is that what we're gonna do today? Just kind of have a brainstorming session with the guest speaker here, or is she
Well,
gonna?
she's going to make a presentation on media literacy and then
Mm,
they'll have questions and answers. They'll
okay.
they'll take up about the first hour and 15 minutes, and then I was going to talk a little bit about that article I sent you all on a little bit of context. Hey, Allie, how you doing?
Alrighty.
Hello. How's it going?
Good, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, let's wait a couple minutes, see if a few more folks show up. I'm recording this, so then I send it to everybody uh, uh, who is not on live on the call.
Cool.
Um, but let's see. And Joe, welcome. Let me give you credit for being in class here. When you get up to the maximum 100 points you can get from class participation, I start giving you extra credit. So that's sort of where I'm at. I'm going to send a quick note to the class because sometimes it inspires more people to come if they know what's going on right now.
Hmm.
Sent that. Grace, I see you're here. Let me give you credit for being here, and then we'll probably start in about 2 minutes. So you're Grace. Grace, you're in that category of you got your 100 points for class participation. Now I just start entering uh, points in extra credit for future class participation. How's the Daily Egyptian going?
I think it's going pretty good.
It looks like it.
Yeah.
I had a student in this class write a piece about sort of the impact um, of online platforms in her sorority that I thought was fairly interesting. I may send it along to you if you
Yeah.
you all want to take a look at it as a possibility.
Please do.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Yeah, last week was definitely an interesting news week at SIU. So we had lots to do.
When you say an interesting news week, what are you referring to?
Oh, our professor who got no longer works at the university after he was found
Yeah.
doing some questionable things on campus.
Hmm.
Right. I was totally absorbed last week in a tenure a tenure meeting, so I'm afraid I
That's a big
wasn't,
deal.
yeah, wasn't paying much other attention.
It was definitely not something I ever expected that we would report on.
Okay, Evan, let me give you credit and then Alee, why don't you, oh, let's see, got two more to add here. Just a sec. Welcome to both of you, and then we're going to get started as soon as I give you credit um, for being here. This is Alee Quick, who's the faculty managing editor of the Daily Egyptian and an expert on news literacy. Uh, Maybe you can tell us as you get started, Alee, a little bit about the news literacy organization that you belong to.
I certainly will.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I brought some slides to go through. Hopefully they're not too boring. There's some interactive pieces, so those of you who are here, when I ask questions, you can feel free to unmute and tell me what you think or put stuff in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that as well. But yeah, so I prepared about an hour's worth of some news literacy basics, and I'll talk about my organization too, as you requested. But today we're going to talk about information typing, a little bit of fact checking, and then the characteristics of credibility.
Great.
Um, Thanks. So I'm Alee. My day job is that I work as a director of community engagement for the News Literacy Project. That is a nationwide nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., but we have a fully remote staff, so we're all over the country. And I love Carbondale, and I've lived here for a long time, so I just got lucky. But my day job at that organization is that I support educators and families, as well as community leaders, youth group leaders, scout leaders who are teaching kids and teens news literacy. I also advise the students at the Daily Egyptian newspaper at SIU. So I hope you all read the DE, and we're going to look at the DE a little bit later as part of what I've prepared today. So in my background, I was a newspaper editor for several years at the Southern Illinoisan. I've also worked in marketing for nonprofits and worked as a fundraiser, worked at the Paul Simon Institute for a brief time as well. And then I'm also the trivia lady at PK's. So I host weekly bar trivia. So first we'll talk about what is news literacy, and this gives you a little bit of insight into my organization. Like I said, we're a nationwide nonprofit. We're nonpartisan. What we do is we create resources, curriculum materials, quizzes, posters, all kinds of things that help teachers who want to teach news and media literacy in their classrooms. We primarily focus on the K-12 space, primarily on, like I said, those classroom educators. But so how we define news literacy is that it's the ability to determine the credibility of news and other information. And we are very careful to say that it's an approach that teaches one how to think about news and information, but not what to think. So we're not in the business of telling you that one news organization is better than another. We are more concerned with talking about skills and tools so that no matter where the information comes from, you can take a look at it and make a determination for yourself, whether it's credible and what you'll do with that information. We have 5 standards for teaching news literacy, and today we're going to talk about 3 of them. But basically, we see these standards as foundational to being news literate. So, one is distinguishing different types of information. We'll get into that in more detail shortly. Another is that we think it's really important to understand the First Amendment, what it does, and why a free press is part of it and part of, American life. We also talk about understanding ethical standards of quality journalism. That's something else we're going to talk about in more detail today. Um, Developing critical habits of mind, or to be more blunt, critical thinking skills are part of this. And we're also talking about seeking and sharing credible information. So it's not just understanding what's credible, but then kind of seeing that you have a duty as, a person to then share something credible and make sure that whatever you're passing on kind of passes your own test. Okay, so we'll get into some stuff. First of all, we're going to talk about distinguishing news from other types of information. So I want to start with a little something. Like I said, you can put answers in the chat if you want to, or you can just like call things out. But this is a post from Instagram. It's from the Pointer Institute. And basically the question is this news or opinion? And how do you know? By looking at this, what tells you whether this is news or opinion?
Well, for me, I would first look at the source, um, like who's posting the Instagram post
Okay,
on this
that's
one.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we see it's Pointer Institute. We know that Pointer posts news and opinion. So we know that this is an organization that does both. So is there anything else when you look at this post that might tell you whether this particular thing is news or opinion? Okay. In the chat, we have whether it's telling the facts straight or leaning toward opinionated views, like implying certain things. So you're talking about language, whether there's a lot of like descriptive language or judgment kind of language. That's great. Even before you read the post, there's one little clue.
Well, I'm just looking at the post and it says in the light green and says commentary.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a labeled post that says commentary, and that is your first clue. So everything you've said is you're all right. Everything is totally right. Um, but just by a quick glance, we know before we even click into it, before we read it and assess the language being used in the full, article, we know this is going to be opinion because it's labeled commentary. And this is something, to think about as writers and thinking about, at the DE, how do we want to label things so we know that it's really, really clear so that there's no miscommunication what this is, news, opinion, whatever. Um, okay, here's another one. So this post, also from Instagram, is an advertisement. So I'm giving that away for you. But how do you know that it's an advertisement? Are there clues? Okay, somebody in the chat said tags. What, someone unmuted? What'd you say?
Partnership.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Y'all got it immediately. So we have a tag that says it's a paid partnership, and then we also have hashtags that identify it as an ad or sponsored. Uh, that's great. Last one. This is a screenshot from Axios. That's a news website, but there is an ad on this page, or maybe 2 or 3. Uh, Anybody want to guess or say where the ad is or ads are and how you know?
I mean, there's an ad at the top that says Honeywell.
Yep, that's right. So that's exactly it. There's one ad on this page, and it kind of blends in with the other articles, I think, and that label is kind of small. So, just kind of demonstrating the importance here of looking at little labels and things like that. But yeah, you got it perfectly. A message from Honeywell indicates that that's an advertisement. And then the rest of the stuff on that right column are news stories. Okay, we also have news. We sometimes have entertainment that's meant to look like news. I don't know if I'm aging myself here by assuming that most people would know who this person is and what this show is, but obviously it's The Daily Show. And on first glance, this looks like news, right? It's somebody sitting behind a desk. He's got a paper. We've got a little graphic. It looks like news, but there are some clues here once again that show us that maybe it's not traditional news. So we've got on this one, I pulled up the description of what The Daily Show is. In the bottom left corner, we see this logo for Comedy Central. That's a clue that maybe this is not from a news channel. And then again, in the description, it says it's on Comedy Central. And then this is Jon Stewart. So another way to determine, what kind of information this is would be to look into this person. And if you Google him, basically what you'll find is that he's an actor and a comedian. So it's entertainment. So all of this is to kind of demonstrate this concept of zoning information, is what we call it. So we can separate information into 6 zones based on their primary purpose. So news is information that's meant to inform you, that uses fair and accurate reporting. And we'll talk a little bit more about some kind of characteristics of credibility, some standards of journalism. But that is, what makes news news. We have opinion. We talked about opinion. It's information that gives a particular perspective, is meant to persuade you, but again, could use fact-based evidence. When you see opinion columns in a standards-based news source, typically there is original reporting that's gone into that. Maybe it's based on a story that was in that very publication, and then someone else is writing an opinion about that. So opinion is not necessarily something that's just bad because it is meant to persuade you. It's just that we need to understand that that is its primary purpose. We have advertising, of course, which is designed to sell you something. We have entertainment, looked at The Daily Show, information that's meant to amuse you, relax you, or distract you in some way. We have raw information that is just information that's unprocessed, not analyzed. This is like, body cam footage, security camera footage, a huge spreadsheet that you get from a government entity with salaries of public employees. This is raw information. And typically, we look to news people or journalists to take that raw information and give us a little context by, talking to experts and helping us understand why it's important and, checking it, placing it in context, analyzing it. And then finally, there's propaganda. This is information that's meant to provoke you, and often can use false or misleading information and can manipulate your emotions. And we'll talk a little bit more about emotional manipulation in our next section.
Hey, Alee,
So
can I
yeah.
jump in to ask you a question? So on
Sure.
that last 6 categories, what category would you put the Doge wall of receipts?
Doge wall of receipts, I would probably put into I would probably put it into raw information. Although I think that the argument could be made that it is propaganda. It's probably somewhere in between, right? So it's presented as raw information, yet it's not clear whether there's been any, tampering, right? So I think that there's an argument to be made, but I would kind of put it more in raw information because it needs that analysis, it needs that context before we can say for sure that it is, misleading. So that's where I would put it. Are there any other questions right now before I kind of like breeze right through to the next? All right. Okay, our next section I think is kind of more fun. So we talk about verification, analysis, and evaluation. So, okay, more looking at stuff and talking about it. So right off the bat, we're giving away this is a fabricated image. But are there any visual cues that might tell us that this is a fabricated image? Does anyone want to jump in?
That plant looks pretty interesting.
Yep, kind of looks like a painting. Anybody else? Oh, I see some chat stuff. Let me see. Planter, reflection. Yeah. Typically, when we look at AI generated images, we talk about the fingers, but these aren't really a dead giveaway in this case. But yeah, things look off, right? It looks a little off. Um, so let's go. Somebody mentioned earlier looking at sources. So I'm going to reveal the source for this one. This is the account that posted this picture. You'll take note that it is called Butt Crack Sports. Is this a reputable source? Maybe it takes a little more investigation, right? So if we look into this organization called Butt Crack Sports and we look at the description, in its bio on X, it says nothing tweeted is factual, satire, news, and trolling. So there you go. So our whoever said earlier, to look at the source, you were way ahead of the ball. This is exactly the point of this, that, there are some visual cues that we can take from this, but there are also other cues that we can take because the problem with AI is that it's getting better. So this is another AI generated image. I think this one is much harder to tell, but there are still some clues here that might tell us that it's AI generated, even if we don't know just by looking right off the bat. Does anybody want to point those out?
Yeah, so what jumps out to me is the castle is actually submerged or looks to be submerged into the water,
Mm-hmm.
which,
And that feels like a red flag.
yeah, yeah.
Anybody else see any clues?
I see like green lines going across the image. I don't
Yeah,
see,
that's
I
a
think those are
watermark. So
watermarks. Oh,
that's a
okay.
watermark. So I can tell you that so my organization, we do watermarks on fabricated images with the point that we don't want to further share false and, AI generated misleading content. So everything you see in here that's an example of something that's fabricated is going to have some kind of marking over it just because we don't want somebody screenshotting this, sharing it, and like contributing to the problem, right? So that's something that we added.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Um,
I'll
yeah,
keep
so
looking.
somebody in the chat said background elements. Reflection looks wrong. Yeah.
What is the Sergi El Sam? What is it? Married Life. What's that about?
So that is a song that was posted along with this. That's where you'll see music that accompanies Instagram posts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and show you that this post again has those tags. So when we talked about advertising, we noticed that there were some hashtags that said that it was an ad, that it was a paid partnership. And in this case, we also have hashtags that show that this is AI generated. So these don't always accompany AI generated images, so we have to be careful. And this is exactly what we're talking about. But in some cases, it's as simple as just taking a closer look at those hashtags and even just looking in the comments sometimes. Like, I know that comment sections can be wild, but sometimes they do give you a clue. Like somebody might say, and you're like, oh yeah, I didn't notice that. Um, so here's the deal with what we call misinformation and disinformation. And I mentioned this with that like propaganda zone of information, is that emotions are meant to manipulate you. And a lot of the times, misinformation that we see online triggers some kind of strong emotion. So Cinderella's castle being submerged after a hurricane can make people feel sad, or shocked, or, upset in some way. So that is, an immediate trigger to go like share it. Um, we looked at the LeBron James Barbie thing. That was funny. Sometimes humor is used to manipulate us too. Joy, happy feelings can be used to manipulate us as well and to encourage our lizard brain to like smash the share button. Um, so one thing that we talk about is different types of misinformation. The point of this and understanding these different types is to activate our spidey senses. So misinformation comes in a lot of different types. These are a few. We will go over these in a little more detail, but just to give you an overview, we're looking at false context. That's when images and quotes can be, just kind of taken from their original context and reposted to take on a whole different meaning. Imposter content is where, on social media, something will be completely just, somebody makes an account that is of a famous person, but it's not really that person. This is a little bit easier now with X, where you can just pay for a verification check mark. So it's a little easier to kind of make these imposter accounts that look really good and look pretty real. Fabricated content is straight up made up. It is AI generated. It is completely just made up. Stolen satire is a common misinformation that we see. And, we can argue about what is satirical and what's funny and what's not, but oftentimes we see satirical, news posts being taken out of their satirical context and shared as if it's real news. And if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find, oh, that originated from a satire account, just like that LeBron James Barbie AI image that we looked at earlier, satire account. Is that satirical? I don't know, but they say it is. And then we have manipulated content. This is stuff that's been doctored in some way. Again, with AI, this is getting easier and easier to do. We're talking about changing how somebody sounds by slowing things down, speeding things up in a video, for example, voice cloning, all kinds of stuff. So I'll show you an example of all of these things. And again, feel free to jump in if you have questions or anything like that. But I've got another kind of not test, but we'll talk about this. So, okay, this is a social media post that purports to show a Temu warehouse in China that burned down. So there are some clues here that might tell us that this is not real. Would we like to jump in and talk about it? We have the total loss of inventory has been estimated to be as high as $56.19. There's some other clues as well. The logos. Okay, what do you mean by the logos? When you talk about logos, there's a couple different ways you can go with this. Somebody said this in the chat. Okay, we're waiting to hear a response on the logos, but does anybody else want to jump in? Are there any clues here? They don't look right, just a little off. Okay, so you're talking about the logos that are on the building. Yeah, so this is supposed to be an M. It kind of looks like an H there. AI generators often have trouble these days anyway with text. That's a dead giveaway. Yeah. Anything else that activates somebody's spidey sense when looking at this?
Say the windows on the buildings, including on the side of the Temu building. Um, they're just the building is weird shape in of itself and has these little slanted rectangular windows. But in the background, the windows are really random where they're placed on the background buildings. They're just little squares and rectangles. And
Yeah, so
normal
perspective seems
architecture isn't
off.
like that.
Yeah, totally. So the perspective seems off. And then Evan in the chat said the fire and smoke look odd. So we're all looking at these visual cues, right? Here's the problem. AI is getting really good. And in a month from now, this very same thing could look a lot more convincing. So we're going to look a little bit deeper. So, okay, the social media post claims to show a photo of a large fire at a Temu warehouse in China. Here's a red flag. Total loss of inventory at an entire warehouse was $56. This is humor, right? It's poking fun at Temu making cheap stuff. So that's a red flag, first of all, that we see. But there's more. So not an authentic image, it's AI generated. So this logo up in the top right that just got circled is a giveaway as well. And there's one in the bottom right. So both of these circled logos, top and bottom, indicate to us that this is fabricated content. This comes from Grok, which is X's, formerly Twitter's AI image generator. So Grok is the logo in the bottom right. That is clearly labeling it as being generated by this AI thing. And then up in the top right, this X with the little line, that is a Grok logo as well. So they didn't stand out to me at first look, right? Like those are kind of hidden. So it's all about like looking a little deeper, making sure you're taking time to really like take it all in. And that was an example of fabricated content. Okay, here we got another one. This image purports to show a screenshot of Trump sharing a post that says, "Thank you, Kanye, very cool." And the original post, supposedly underneath it, is a stick figure drawing, looks a little childish, says, "Hi, Donald, I drew a picture of me and you. It's kind of dumb, but I thought you'd like it. IDK." Here's the original post. So what Trump actually shared and said, "Thank you, Kanye, very cool," was this tweet or X post that says, "You don't have to agree with Trump, but the mob can't make me not love him. We're both dragon energy. He's my brother." So it's an it's a Kanye West post, but it's not a drawing of a stick figure. Um, the original post did not include the drawing. This is made up. But Trump's response was authentic. So it was easy to kind of manipulate the content, right? So we had Trump with a tweet that says, "Thank you, Kanye, very cool." With Photoshop, with Canva, with anything, it's so easy to just replace it with whatever you want. So manipulated content is that stuff that's been doctored in some way. Okay, here we have a post from the Los Angeles fires that happened really recently. This says, "Breaking. Los Angeles fire hydrants are out of water because the county refused to refill reservoirs. Can't fight a fire without water." Um, so it's basically accusing city officials of refusing to fill reservoirs. But in reality, officials did not refuse to fill the reservoirs. They were full before the fires. Obviously, demand went up and it became harder to refill those tanks at the higher elevations. So this is false context. This is, a screenshot from a news report that's been taken out of context and shared with something else. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit about how we can figure out that this is not true. But, just giving you an example of, again, activating those spidey senses. This is the type of stuff that we see where we should go, especially if it's, a big breaking news event. These can be times that are just ripe for, people want information as soon as possible and, tensions are high. So again, it's that, recognizing that there's some emotion that's happening and kind of taking down the temperature and then checking the facts. And we'll
So,
talk about how to, yeah, go ahead.
that logo in the upper left corner of the previous one, what is that? That red right before breaking. The
Right
logo
before
from Fox
breaking.
11?
It's just an emoji.
Oh, it's an emoji. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank
Oh,
you.
of what?
Um,
I can't see it.
it's like a siren. It's meant to look like a
Oh,
siren.
okay, okay. So is
So
this supposed
yeah,
to be,
emojis definitely are
Yeah, that's
used
how you
on.
know something's like on Twitter is like fake
is
too.
this supposed to be something that this real estate developer said to Fox 11, and did he actually say it?
Well, here's how we would find out. It's a technique we call lateral reading. So if you wanted to know if, and I've got this like coming up, so we'll talk a little bit more about lateral reading. But basically, instead of reading an article vertically, which is top to bottom, reading laterally is reading from side to side, which means that you would open another tab in a browser and check the information that you're seeing. So if I see this on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and it says you can't fight a fire without water, we want to know if this person actually said this. And we see that it's from Fox 11, right? So we can go and look up that original article, open another tab, type in Fox 11, quote, "You can't fight a fire without water," end quote, enter, and see what you find, right? And we can confirm the actual, facts behind this purported, there's no water in the reservoirs. Well, why? So there, and there was a lot of reporting around this. So yeah, there's absolutely a way to check that. And really it's comes down to a quick Google search and, doing some further reading. I'm gonna check the chat. Okay, got it. Okay, so What else do we have here? We have Jimmy Kimmel show canceled on January 20th. I'm leaving and never coming back. Uh, this one is a pretty obvious giveaway, I think. In the bottom right, we see some clues that this might not be legit, but we're going to look at the origin of this. So this claim is not true. Jimmy Kimmel is not canceled. He didn't say this. This claim originated from an article on a satirical website called SpaceX Mania. And again, to your question, if we want to find out, did Jimmy Kimmel say this? Open another tab, type it in, and see what you get. If you look at SpaceX Mania, the origin of this claim, you'll see that there is a label in the top right that says satire. And also underneath this headline, there's also a label that says satire. So, when you see social media posts like this, shared with no link, shared with no, no original source, that's a really good indication that, hey, I want to Google this and see a little bit deeper what's really going on here. In this case, yeah.
SpaceX Mania.
What's that?
Who's behind SpaceX Mania? Who's the creator?
I actually don't know off the top of my head, but we could definitely figure it out. Most of the time, you can look up who owns a domain, a URL. You can also, we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but there are fact-checking sites out there where if you Google claims like this, some of the results that you might get are from fact checkers like Snopes, for example. And Snopes is really, really good about diving deep into origins of things like this and kind of doing that hard work for you. But they show their work. Like all the Snopes posts are really long because they will go into like great depth and they have references. So that's a way, and once these kind of sites pop up, there's just more reporting that gets done about them from fact check reporters and things like that. So oftentimes you can look to, a standards-based news outlet and just investigate what is this? Who's behind it? And I'm going to show you that in a little bit. We're using the Daily Egyptian as an example, but yeah. So in this case, this kind of removed from the satirical context, stolen satire, we call it. This actually had in the bottom right, this statement. This is a fictionalized statement, but that's pretty rare that you're actually going to find that. So this is satire that's been removed from its original context. And we got one more. So this is a social media post that claims to show Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Saying that he was going to ban Diet Coke in the US. But there's some pretty obvious clues here that show us that this is not legit. In reality, RFK did not say that. And this is completely false. The account that posted this is a parody account. It's since been deleted. And this is an example of what we call that imposter content that I talked about earlier, that it's super easy now to just create an account pretending to be anybody, like it has a photo of him and it's labeled as a parody. So this is a pretty clear example. But if you're just kind of scrolling and glancing, like, I don't know that I would notice that right away, right? Like it takes like slowing down and just taking a minute. Some other common things to watch out for are phrases like let that sink in, the media won't report this, make this go viral is a really good indication that like somebody's up to something, right? Or looking for engagement, doing engagement bait. So these are some red flags. And then some commonalities that we see, and I'll show you this. We have manipulated text on signs or t-shirts. This is so common. If I see a celebrity in a t-shirt, I don't believe it. Like, I just don't. I just don't anymore. Like, we have to double check because, I mean, you've all, I'm sure, seen these posts, like, and they look a little bit fake, but like they're getting better and it's easier to be fooled. Engagement bait is really common. So we'll see like AI generated images of like giant squids and like things like this that are not real. Photos of crowds are often manipulated. It's super easy to do during the presidential campaign. We saw a lot of crowd shots that were doctored or misrepresented in some way. And then screenshots of articles with no links are a huge red flag. If you see a screenshot and it looks like news, but it's not going anywhere, it's not linking you to anything, that's a super red flag. Okay, thank you for sharing about SpaceX Mania. Okay, about us. Owned and operated by Funky Productions LLC, we're a team of writers and editors based in New York. Our mission to bring you the freshest fake news, sassy analysis, and a good dose of satire, all rolled into one crazy concoction that orbits around Elon Musk and everything that's lighting up the viral or trending charts. So just right there on their about us page, they totally out themselves. So that is a super, like, that's a great way to just figure out what's going on with an account, is to just look at about us. And yeah. Okay. This is an example I just wanted to show you guys of a post that's meant to look like news, but is completely fabricated and has no link, right? So also the unfortunate thing that I'm noticing in a lot of kind of spreaders of misinformation that are meant to look like news is that breaking is becoming one of these like phrases that are used a lot, which is unfortunate because in the news business, we still use this term too, in a perfectly legitimate way, breaking news. But these days, if something says breaking like this, I'm going to treat it a little cautiously. So this account is called Breaking 911. It says Mitch McConnell has died at the age of 82, but there's no link, and a quick Google search would show us that this is fake, that he's not dead.
That
Here's a
XL,
t-shirt.
that XL in the top there does that mean it was generated by X's AI?
Yeah, that's an X. I think that's the Gronk logo. Yeah. Grok, my bad. I always confuse that. Yeah, so that's another red flag that we talked about earlier. Yeah. I mentioned t-shirts. Like I said, t-shirts, if you see a famous person holding a t-shirt on social media, just immediate red flag. Immediate red flag. Did he hold either of these? Like, I don't even know. But it's a red flag. On the left is the fabricated one. I believe on the right is the real one. Here's another one that I'm going to use to show you guys an example of some fact-checking skills. So this one on the left is the fabricated one. Once again, we've got that logo on the top right that we've been talking about. So on the left, it has ICE police arresting somebody who supposedly has a t-shirt on that says Latinos for Trump. On the right is the original image. It was a blank t-shirt. We know nothing about how he voted or if he voted or like where this is or anything. So be careful. Shirts are just absolutely ripe for doctoring. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that if you came across this image, you could tell. And this is our old friend Google. And when you go to google.com, there is a little camera icon in the search box. And I'm sure a lot of you have done this before, but we're just going to go over it anyway. So you can search by image and you can actually upload the image. So I took that photo and I saved it and I uploaded it to Google Image, to Google Lens is what they call it now. And here's what I get. Here's my first page of results. It's a lot of that same image, but if I look a little bit closer at the websites these are coming from, first of all, on the top left, I see a Snopes post. And I mentioned Snopes earlier. That's a fact-checking site. And it says photo of ICE agents arresting man wearing. Okay, so we don't know the whole headline yet, but I'm seeing Snopes pop up. So I'm thinking, maybe this is getting fact-checked somewhere. I'm seeing a lot of social media chatter. Julie on X. Who's Julie? Is she an expert or journalist? Well, I don't know. We see a lot of social media posts. Impeach Trump. It seems like a lot of these social media posts may be kind of like saying the same thing, trying to point out some hypocrisy perhaps, but we don't know. So I am not feeling great that this is a legitimate image. And so another thing you can do is click this about. And here's what we get. And I just did this yesterday. About this image. Similar images are at least 5 years old. And then we have more information about where this image is found. And now I can see the full headline from Snopes. Photo of ICE agents arresting man wearing Latinos for Trump shirt is fake. So this is from January of this year. Snopes recently did a post debunking it. The second result is from Know Your Meme. So again, pretty good indication that maybe this is something that's not news. It's a meme, so that's giving me some clues. So what I would do is I would click on this Snopes post and read more about it. I also wanted to show you guys another website. So Google has kind of recently changed how their reverse image searching works. It's kind of Google Lens is now more about like products and showing you similar images rather than like getting to the bottom of it. I find that my results with Google image search these days are a little more murky. So I like this website called tineye.com. This is kind of more like the old school Google reverse image searching. But you can do the same thing. So tineye.com, you can upload an image. So I uploaded the image to Tineye to see what I got. And the first result here is this one with the blank shirt, and it's from stock. Alee.com is a stock photo provider. So I also see it from Telemundo, but without the Trump logo. So this is giving me some clues. So I clicked on that first result of Alee, which like I said, is a stock photo provider. And I see here some context, and it's got the Alee watermark, and I can buy it and use it in my news reporting if I want to. And then if I scroll down a little bit more, there's details about the image. I see that it comes from AB Forces News Collection, which appears to be a like military, when I Googled them, appears to be like a military communications outfit. And it's got information about when it was taken. So, it was taken in June of 2018, but the shirt said Trump 2024. So a little confusing there, right? So these are all things that have helped me understand where this comes from. And so earlier we talked about what was that SpaceX mania? How do we know? And I mentioned this concept of lateral reading. This is kind of what we're doing here with that image. Instead of just kind of taking it at face value, we're opening other tabs. We're looking a little bit deeper. We're doing some of our own research in some other places to see if we can verify what we've seen. And there are so many things that you can search about. You can search about the origin, this specific website. I want to know who's behind it. I want to know the origin of this actual image. Was this the actual image or has it been doctored? I want to know more about a person. I mentioned earlier that if we saw Jon Stewart was like saying something, okay, who's Jon Stewart? What does he do? I open another tab, I type in Jon Stewart Daily Show, and I get a lot of context about that. I understand he's an actor and he's a comedian. I understand that The Daily Show is a show on Comedy Central, so it's probably not news. So we've kind of talked about this concept a little bit as we've kind of gone through these different things. This is a video that I'm going to skip, but it's going to start and then I'll stop it. But basically, just an example of lateral reading. This is a post from Instagram. This is someone who is an influencer, nutrition wellness influencer. And this is clearly labeled as an ad. We've talked about those hashtags. So we've got that advertisement hashtag there. So that's giving us a clue, first of all. And basically, this video is talking about whether or not aspartame is safe. Aspartame is an artificial sweetener. It's been kind of controversial over the years. The question is it safe to consume? And this influencer is giving her take, right? So we've got the ad, hashtag, safety of aspartame hashtag, and some other things. Like I said, I'm going to skip that because I don't think I've got sound enabled. Whoops. No, stop. Okay. So we can use lateral reading to understand a little bit deeper who's paying for this, right? So it's an advertisement. We know that. So somebody's paying for it, right? So we can look up that hashtag. We can look up some of the things that she said about aspartame is safe. And we find this website, safetyofaspartame.com. And if we look a little bit deeper, we see that the sponsor organization for this is American Beverage. What's American Beverage? Let's open another tab and Google them. And what we find is American Beverage Association is a government lobbying group that represents the beverage industry in the United States. Members include producers of soft drinks such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Keurig, Dr. Pepper. So we are seeing a thread here of who might be behind paying this influencer to talk about how aspartame is safe. Also on our lateral reading journey, we would find this Washington Post article titled "The Food Industry Pays Influencer Dietitians to Shape Your Eating Habits." And here in the bottom, we have her. There she is, the aspartame lady who was telling us aspartame is safe in a paid post. So we found her and we found a, in-depth journalistic story explaining what is behind this. Somebody has actually gone and done their research for you. That's what journalists do. We can do further reading. So we want to learn more about aspartame. We have the Food and Drug Administration, the Associated Press. Soda sweetener aspartame is listed as a possible cancer cause, but it's still considered safe. So this is another, journalistic article going into a little more depth about this topic. Washington Post has another story talking about aspartame being under scrutiny from the World Health Organization. We have aspartame being listed as a possible carcinogen in another story. So opening tabs, doing some research about aspartame, doing some research about the entity that's behind this influencer post. This is all adding to our knowledge and adding to our assessment of whether or not we feel this is credible, right? So, it's up to you. Like, do you feel that this is a credible thing, that aspartame, which has been controversial, is being supported by an influencer who's being paid by beverage companies who want to use aspartame in their products? There we go. I'll pause here and see if anybody has questions before I move on to my last little section, which is about ethical standards of journalism. Anybody got any questions or comments or anything right now? Okay, we'll talk about ethical standards of quality journalism and we'll wrap up. So this is the Society for Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. This is hanging on the wall in the Daily Egyptian office. If you all are on campus and ever want to come see us and think about working for the DE, please do. But this is on the wall at our organization and probably a lot of newsrooms out there. And here's the basics. Seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, be accountable and transparent. So these are some of the, standards that we strive to uphold. Journalism as a practice is, it's up to a lot of interpretation. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but it is, something that does have a code of ethics at its core. It's a discipline of verification. This is an example of an article that my colleague Hannah submitted to an editor when she worked at the Minneapolis Star Tribune. The things that are highlighted and checkmarked are facts that her copy editor was actually checking. So she turned this story in, and her editor is looking through, the simple facts, the things that can be verified, and is independently verifying them. In particular, we've got this guy's name, Eric Thorvig. We're checking that this is spelled correctly because, wow, that's a lot of, it's a lot of letters, and names are very commonly something that we mess up, right? And something that's always worth checking. So we're looking at the process of copy editors and reporters fact checking their work. We talk about 7 standards of quality journalism, and this is a way that we can evaluate credibility of news and other information. I'll show you another kind of 5-step thing that will go in a little more detail, but the 7 standards of quality journalism, we're using multiple credible sources, we're verifying, which I showed you all, we're avoiding bias. The bias discussion is a whole other hour's worth of stuff. And it's very complicated and it's a lot of subjectivity, and we're all bringing our own stories and our own backgrounds. But the point is that we are trying and we're being intentional about avoiding bias, that we're having conversations in the newsroom that help us identify our own bias. This is why, journalism is best when it's collaborative, in my opinion, because we have a lot of different people kind of taking a look and checking and balancing each other. Speaking of, we have balance. We're representing multiple sides, not to be confused with both sidesism, which I'd be happy to get into more in another time. But, we're looking for some balance, especially when something is controversial. We want to hear, various opinions on a matter. We're looking at documentation. Early on, we talked about raw information and how journalists, part of our job is to, look at this raw information, interpret it, give context to it. Context. This is something we talk about at the DE a lot. It's not our job to just report what somebody said, but to also give context. Why does it matter that the mayor said this thing or that thing? What's the history behind that? Is this an ongoing issue that's been, decades in the making? Oftentimes, yeah, it's complicated. So we got to give that context. And then fairness. We're trying to, seek that fairness when sources are especially being accused of something. We're seeking comment from them. So these are all kind of these like standards that we're striving to uphold when we are doing news. Um, did I just click on something? Yes, I did. Okay, my bad. Okay. We've got a five-step process called Is It Legit? And these are some tips and some things that we've kind of already talked about where if you come across a news source that you may be unfamiliar with, news or maybe not news, here's how you can check whether it's legitimate. And we're going to walk through this using our old friend, the Daily Egyptian, as an example. So we do a quick search. We've talked about that a lot. We look for their standards. Do they have a code of ethics that's posted? We check for transparency. Do we know who works there? Do we know where it's located? Do we know who pays for it? We examine how errors are handled. Journalists are not perfect. We're people too. So sometimes corrections will have to be made. How are they made? When are they made? How does this organization handle that? And then it takes a little time to assess news coverage. And that means actually reading some stuff. You may go there to read one thing in particular, but if you want to get a fuller understanding of what this organization does, how it reports on the news, go to their homepage and click on a lot of stuff. Okay, so do a quick search. I just encountered the Daily Egyptian for the very first time, and I want to know if it is a real news source. So I went to Google and I typed in the Daily Egyptian. And even when I went to news, Google News, I got a ton of results from the Daily Egyptian. But I don't want results from the Daily Egyptian. I want other people to tell me whether the Daily Egyptian is legitimate. So there are many different tricks that you can use on Google to narrow down your search results. In this case, what I've done is I did this hyphen site dailyegyptian.com, which will eliminate any result from dailyegyptian.com. So this is only showing me results from other websites. SIU News is the kind of media landing page for Southern Illinois University. I see that they did a story about these journalism students who are traveling to DC. And that gives me a pretty good clue that, these are real people. Here's some faces of some journalism students who are, going to DC. This article from SIU News explains what the Daily Egyptian is and talks about, how they're thinking about their reporting. So great clue. WSIU had a story about the same thing. But again, I'm, actually hearing from these students who are doing the reporting. So this is a really good indication that yes, this is a student-run newspaper, which is what it purports to be. And if you go to, the Daily Egyptian's about page, you'll see, hey, we're an independent student newspaper at Southern Illinois University. Doing this search has helped me to verify that independently. We're going to look for standards. So there,
Let me,
yeah,
what was that third, the gateway. But
yeah.
what's that?
So this is a little bit older. It's from 2018. The Gateway Online, I have to be honest with you, I didn't click on this one because I kind of found the answer I was looking for. But this is referencing some Daily Egyptian reporting is my best interpretation. So when we had a Chancellor Montemagno several years ago, he was a very controversial figure. The Daily Egyptian was doing a lot of reporting about him and kind of looking into his background and some of the big things he was planning to do on campus. And I remember from being a journalist in town at that time that this was extremely controversial and it was something that made news across the country because at Montemagno's previous school, which was like in the east somewhere,
No,
um,
Canada.
it was in Canada. Yeah, thank you. He had gotten into some trouble. So this is about his Canadian lab. And I remember from being here that the Daily Egyptian broke a story about this. So I'm betting that this is referencing the Daily Egyptian's reporting from that time.
The reason I asked about it is that I actually paid for that reporting. I paid for the reporter to go to Canada.
Oh,
Her
yeah.
name's Anna Spory.
Yeah.
Professional journalist, went on to Des Moines Register, Kansas Star. Now she works for the Missouri Independent, last I saw, and she did an investigative story from Canada, which the Daily Egyptian published, and I published in. I used Gateway Journalism Review money to pay for her,
Yeah.
also pay her a freelance fee, um, and we printed it in the Gateway Journalism Review. But I have no idea what the Gateway on online is, which is why that popped out to me in connection with
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
I mean, it's definitely a publication that's referencing that reporting.
the chancellor.
Um,
Certainly did not like the chancellor, who is still
no, he
alive,
did not.
did not like that reporting at all.
No, he did not. The Gateway is the University of Alberta's newspaper. So it was the paper for his his previous school.
Okay, great.
There you
Thanks.
go. So continuing on our journey of is the Daily Egyptian a legitimate news source? We are looking for standards. So in this process, I realized that the Daily Egyptian could do better about advertising what our standards are. I know that we have them on our website, but do regular people know that? It's not super easy to find. So this was a lesson for me as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity to learn something about the Daily Egyptian website. But if I type into Google Daily Egyptian standards, like do they have standards? We see a couple results come up. We've got some stuff that's not super useful, like the standard DE Media Kit. That's really not what I'm looking for. Open SIUC is a place where all the research at SIU gets posted. Not super what I'm looking for. But in the AI overview, I see the Daily Egyptian staff agreement policy, and that looks pretty interesting. So if I click on that, there's a bunch of standards in there. There's, requirements for how staff can work there. The standard of ethics is in there. The SPJ standard of ethics is in there. So there's a lot of stuff that answers my questions here. So it does check the box, even if it could be a little easier to find. We're checking for transparency. So what's on the About page for the Daily Egyptian? We have who works at the DE, how is the DE supported, who's funding it, how are they funding it, who determines what goes in the newspaper. We have some other kind of editorial practices outlined here. So check. We've got some transparency here from them.
Yeah.
We want to see how errors are handled. Earlier, I mentioned that names are often misspelled, and in this case, we had a name that was misspelled. And so we went in and fixed the name. It was originally spelled incorrectly, and then we added a line that says this cut line has been edited to correct the spelling of Jacqueline Cole's name. So again, this is being transparent. We made a mistake. We're fixing it, and we're letting you know that we made a mistake. We're not just trying to cover it up and pretend it didn't happen. We've got to be transparent about that. We've got to admit, yeah, we made a mistake. And then assessing news coverage. This is the one that takes a little more time. And this is what the Daily Egyptian's homepage looked like yesterday. We can click through these and make an assessment for ourselves. How are they covering this community? What is the reporting actually saying about the organization? So once you've kind of done what you came to do on a news website, you got to go back and take a look at the full scope of their reporting. And it'll give you a good idea of where they're at. Okay, that's all I got. Ooh, exactly an hour. So thank you all so much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of questions, but why don't I let you students go first?
So, in the case of the things that aren't necessarily AI generated, can you just kind of re-go over the cross-referencing?
Oh, sure. Like the lateral reading, is that
Yeah.
is that kind of what you're
Hmm.
thinking of?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, actually, let's see. Um, so we had that. I showed the post about let's see. I showed the post about Mitch McConnell being dead, and it was a social media post that had no link back to any news source.
Right.
So, what I would like to do is Google, Mitch McConnell dead. So I find some results. So this is lateral reading right here. So
Yeah.
so our examples, we have a website called Is Mitch McConnell Dead Yet, which is kind of morbid and yet anyway. Let's see. We have Mitch McConnell His Senate reign ends with a whimper on February 28th, 2025. February 20th, 2025, the Associated Press has a story about how he's not going to seek re-election in 2026. This was just a couple weeks ago. It was a month ago that he was talking about not seeking re-election, so he was alive. The other thing is that if Mitch McConnell were dead, and if he had just died today, our first hit would be like New York Times, Washington Post, all these Kentucky papers saying in big letter, Mitch McConnell died today. I mean, that would be huge news. So this is another way that we can kind of gander that he's still alive. So this
Right.
is how
Okay.
we're checking things. Yeah, sorry, did I not
Okay.
answer your question?
Oh no. No, no, you did fine.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Other questions?
So, how do you, how do you plan on getting, like, ensuring, like, I guess I understand the point of the presentation, but obviously there's people who engage with that media. How do
Mhm.
you reach out to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, my organization is primarily concerned with making resources for teachers. We are in use in over 50 states, especially states where there is now a media literacy requirement for teaching, like Illinois, which just passed within the last couple of years. In Illinois, every high school student is required to have some kind of media literacy education before they graduate high school. And here we are to help Illinois teachers fulfill that, right? We have a ton of resources that are ready for classroom use. We try to make it as easy as possible for teachers to take this stuff to their classrooms, take it to their students. The whole idea behind that being that we see this impacting the consumer side. So, as people who are using social media, we are being a little more discerning about what we're clicking, what we're sharing. Um, and that is the hope, right? We're teaching future generations, especially in this kind of really complicated information economy and landscape, how they can, empower themselves and seek, credible information and then share credible information. That's very much a part of our curriculum.
So Ally, let me ask you about that Illinois first in the nation media literacy law, which we found was not being followed up on very much. So
Nope.
are you finding teachers coming to you and saying, "Oh, do you have
Yeah.
how much?"
It depends. So, across the country, there are media literacy laws at state levels that come in different kind of stripes, right? In Illinois, the problem is that it's not a standards requirement, it's a teaching requirement, which is super loose. So, in some places, the laws actually say, here are the things that students need. Boom. Like they lay them out. In Illinois, it's like, teach media literacy, please. And so it's a little more vague.
It could be one
So it
class or
depends on the
one
state.
semester or 1 year or in social studies or in math
It's
or
up to you. Yeah, exactly.
I
So
mean,
that's the thing. Like it leaves it very much up to it's one of those mandates that's like, is it really a mandate if they don't lay out,
right.
like you say, these details? Um, we hear from a lot of teachers who are kind of more spontaneous about wanting this and seeing that it's important, seeing students on social media a lot, seeing students on, engaging with AI created content a lot. And, so a lot of times we do have teachers that come to us. We also have a district fellowship program where we partner with districts around the country and we actually like help them fund programs in their district to get this like implemented in more classrooms. We have an entire educator engagement team at my organization that reaches out to schools. Part of what I do is reach out to schools too, although my focus is more on engaging their families around these topics. A lot of schools have programs for families, back to school night where your parents will come and learn about what's happening in the classroom. So that's where I come in. Um, so yeah, I mean, it depends on the school, it depends on the state. And my organization is, we're not able to lobby because we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. But where there are requirements for news literacy or media literacy, we're there to help. We're all about creating the resources and making sure that when teachers are ready to teach those things, they have what they need to do it.
So do you have a sense of how many school districts within the state of Illinois have actually got working media literacy instruction going on?
In the state of Illinois, I don't know. I would have to pull that information from the person I'm on the research and design team. That's an educator engagement thing.
Okay.
And so I just don't know off the top of my head. But I know that I've heard from some Southern Illinois districts. We've worked with Chicago in the past too. Some suburban districts. So we're here and there. We're not in every school, but I think when teachers hear about us, they see that it makes their job a lot easier if they want to teach this stuff.
So you said,
Um, Go ahead.
somebody else was going, I want students to get the first shot. Was somebody about to say something?
Teresa said something, and sorry if I mispronounced your name, in the chat. How do we go about getting others to use these tools? Many people want convenience that confirms their bias. I've used NLP a few times before, but there's so much stubbornness. How do you feel about critical information to fight mis and dis and malinformation being put behind a paywall? So the first thing, getting others to use the tools, like I said, we are all about we're all about helping teachers, meeting teachers where they are. And since you're in a public library, I'd be happy to help you if you have anything in particular. I'll put my email in the chat, and y'all can feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions or want to look at any resources. There is a lot of stubbornness with adults. I mean, I think that, our focus again is on that K-12 space. We're looking at, really making sure that this is a foundational part of civics education and media literacy education. So that's our approach there. As far as paywalls, it's tough, right? Journalism in this country has a history of being a business. Like people used to go to the newsstand and spend a quarter to get the newspaper. And so, you got to pay people. Over the years, as the media landscape has changed, that outlook has changed a little bit too. Basically, publishers are kind of employing that same idea of you stop by the newsstand, you pay a quarter to get the newspaper. Now it's online, you got to pay to subscribe, you got to pay to get past the paywall, right? So is that working in this media landscape? I don't really know. I mean, I will say that there's a lot of stuff that's out there for free that is mis and disinformation. So that's an issue. But I'll also say that as the news landscape changes, there are a lot more nonprofit newsrooms that are cropping up that are kind of trying to fill that void. And in pretty much every case, nonprofit newsrooms are giving away their content for free. Capital News Illinois is a great example. They're funded by foundation money. They're part of the Illinois Press Foundation. And they're doing really good journalism. Molly Parker, who is a professor at SIU as well, works for them. They have some really stellar investigative journalists. They have some really good state house reporters. They were kind of established to fill that void in state house reporting. And you can go to capitalnewsillinois.com anytime and read all their stuff for free. And any publisher around the state can pick up their stuff and rerun it for free. And this is a model that's growing. So I think there's hope there as far as when it comes to rebuilding some trust and having some reputable news that's out there that is not behind a paywall. So it's tough.
So you said at the beginning that you're nonpartisan, bipartisan, etc. So how do you deal with, say, the sort of central storyline of President Trump that the 2020 election was stolen from him? How do you deal with that from a media literacy point of view?
Yeah. So again, our focus is on, since we are a nonpartisan organization, our focus would be on helping, teach the tools to let people determine for themselves whether they believe what they believe about the 2020 election. We don't really make it a practice to talk about specific politicians unless we are talking about a news literacy issue or using something as an example, like we talked about Mitch McConnell in the context of, hey, this was a rumor that he had died. It's not real. So our focus is really on giving the tools and not just coming out and saying this is right or this is wrong. It's about looking at how do journalists do their work? How do we know that helps us evaluate what the information that they're giving us, as opposed to people who are not journalists? Like, where do they get their information from, and how did that come about? So, yeah, so we're pretty careful not to specifically address any like one issue or one politician, but again, to just really focus on those tools so that when people, building up the spidey sense, as we talked about, if something feels like a red flag, how do you check it out?
What information do you give them that would help them come to the conclusion that the election was stolen?
Um, do we give, I mean, we don't give them information that would lead to that. We talk about looking for credible sourcing. We also don't come out and tell them, you should believe this or you should believe that. I mean, that's the thing that's important about us and how we maintain that nonpartisanship, is that we, when, like, for example, we looked at the aspartame. I didn't say aspartame is bad. I said, this is who paid for this ad. This is what leads to this, right? Like, we're talking about developing critical habits of mind. We're talking about, developing these skills for yourself. We're not in the business of just saying this is right or wrong. There's a lot of other organizations that do that, and that's not what we do.
Do you have different slideshows for different like generations?
Oh, that's a good question. So, yeah, we absolutely do have different resources that are meant for different grade levels. In the past, we had done some more adult education, but we've kind of wound that down a little bit just to really focus our mission on that K-12 space. But we have, our resources are, on our website based on grade bands, right? So we say this is appropriate for like fifth grade to seventh grade, and this is appropriate for like 11th and 12th graders and things like that. So yeah, we definitely do tailor our presentations for different age groups and
Awesome.
experience levels.
Yeah, I was like, well, I don't think a kindergartner has much interest in aspartame, but yeah,
Right. No, for sure. And actually, it's new for us to be developing some of that really early education stuff. So, a lot of my colleagues are working on that right now, about developing resources for like what's age appropriate for kids who are like kindergarten to third grade, which we know a lot of them have devices and iPads. They're starting to interact with algorithms at that time. So, how do we talk to them about these things when they're so young, but they're in the media environment, right? So, yeah.
and they have parent handouts too.
Yeah, that's something that I specifically am working on. And I'm focusing on that zoning information for parents and algorithms. That's something we didn't cover today, but we have a whole lesson on algorithms that I think is really, really important, foundational in this day. Understanding how the data you give an algorithm then feeds something back to you. It's so it's these things run in the background. We just take it for granted, right? So yeah.
You said you also steer away from telling people what are credible and not credible news sources. Um, so, I mean, if somebody asks you, what should I believe? Like, students oftentimes don't know exactly what to believe, yeah,
Hmm.
and citizens. And
Yeah.
is the if Wall Street Journal as credible as Breitbart, what would you do about that question?
I would say, to use that the 5-step is it legit process that we went through for the Daily Egyptian, where we do a quick search, learn what we can about the organization from other sources. What do people say about this? If we Google certain news sources, we're going to find information about them, right? So we might find a page that would identify this org or that org as left leaning or right leaning. That's not the last stop though, right? That's the first stop. Then we look at, do they have standards posted on their website? Are they transparent about who works there and who funds them? How do they handle corrections or errors? And then evaluating the news coverage. When we go to their homepage, do we see a lot of all caps? Do we see a lot of, adjectives? Do we see a lot of language that feels judgmental? Or do we see, kind of, news reporting that, is taking that step back and seems more like factual or not emotional? And these are skills that are developed over time. So, our approach is, I guess, maybe a little more nuanced, which we can, argue all day whether there's a place for nuance in 2025. I like to think that there is, and, working for an organization that specifically says, hey, don't tell people which ones are good or bad. It's all about teaching those skills and understanding that we can make these determinations for ourselves, and there are ways that we can see who's funding an organization, who works there, and what they do and what their background is. And there's a lot of ways to find information so that we can make these decisions for ourselves.
Well, could your organization apply your 5-step process or whatever step process it is to the major news organizations and say which ones better meet your criteria?
We could. I mean, I walk through an example here with the Daily Egyptian because, being an SIU class, I thought that was relevant to us. But, obviously I also work at the Daily Egyptian, so I'm a little biased. So I didn't end it with saying, and the Daily Egyptian is a perfectly reputable source. Check. But no, we went through these 5 steps. We learned what we could learn. And, you know, it's ultimately up to, the individual.
I'm asking you these questions because I mean I oftentimes am asked to to speak around the community about media literacy and all. And like we have our state representative in Missouri who's the main sponsor of a media literacy law. His name's Jim Murphy. And he's a strong Republican.
Hmm.
And so when I bring up that that media literacy is a really fraught topic when you have the president of the United States falsely stating that he won the 2020 election. I mean, he just like, oh no, we're not going to get into politics. No way we're going to get into politics. Um, it's it's like the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah,
you
it is.
I saw some. I wonder if you can. I wonder if you saw this the other day. On TikTok. Well, should I watch TikTok? My children and grandchildren say I shouldn't. Do
You
you?
shouldn't?
Do you? Yeah, they say I shouldn't. I do though. Do
Yeah,
you?
I have a TikTok. Daily Egyptian has a TikTok.
Okay, so a couple of things I saw on TikTok in the last week about Donald Trump were one of them seemed to be a quote where he was saying that he didn't know why it was called the District of Columbia. It should be called the District of America. And another quote where he said that by daylight savings time it causes a person who's about to die to lose an hour of their life. These totally ridiculous things. But so I actually set off at one point to try to determine had he actually said these things, but
Yeah,
I got diverted. Did you hear those as well, or
I haven't. No, I did not hear those particular things.
I'm very suspicious about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, quotes are super easy to take out of context. That's something that, should absolutely raise your suspicion. Yeah, especially if it's on social media with no link back or proof. But the thing is, like, Trump is so heavily covered by major news organizations. If he said something like that, it would be there, right? Like, in order for that to be true, like, what else would have to be true? There would have to be a news story about it, right? Like,
Right.
there would have to be.
So Snopes, you think is a good fact checker?
I like Snopes personally. I use it. One of my colleagues used to work at Snopes, so I know how the sausage is made at Snopes. The nice thing is that they have references, so you can kind of check they show their work. Um, yeah.
So how do you instruct kids to fight the algorithm? Because once you start clicking on those to investigate them, that tells the algorithm that you like those things. So
Yeah.
in order to figure out if it's fake, you have to engage with it, and therefore you kind of end up in a spiral. So
Sure. Yeah, so I think part of what our approach is about understanding that, like understanding that everything you do is feeding information into the algorithm and it's going to influence what is fed back to you. Um, as I have learned this stuff myself working at News Literacy Project, I've worked here about 3 years. So before I worked here, I wasn't really thinking about the algorithm either. Like I had never gone through that lesson, right? But as I learned about it and really saw, what is behind it all, it has really changed how I at least engage with the content that is shown to me. I understand how Instagram is feeding me certain things, and it helps me avoid the rabbit hole because I see it now. I'm like, oh, they recognize that I did this, and now it's like sending me more of this stuff. And like for me, as like a woman in my mid 30s, like a lot of it can be really emotional. So it's all about that awareness and then learning what to do when you have that strong emotion, knowing that that's a red flag. Um, the algorithm is all around us. Unfortunately, I don't think there's much we can do to really fight it, right? It's in everything. It's in everything. Um, Everything has an algorithm now that we use. Google, our email, everything. So unless you like get rid of your phone, stay off the computer, like there's no way to fight the algorithm. But knowing that it's there and knowing how it works is really powerful for helping you understand why you're seeing the content you're seeing and helping you avoid things like filter bubbles, which is where, we're just only seeing the stuff that we like, that um, I see a lot of like, again, being a being a woman in my 30s, I see a lot of like relationship stuff, relationship, this. And like it's so easy to doom scroll on that. The way I find it is that I'm like, I'm not gonna watch this. I'm gonna talk to a real person, about the issues in my life and not just like doom scroll about like what girls say that men do, blah blah blah, right? Like there's so much. Um, so it's not about fighting it because it's always there. It's about knowing how to handle it. Let's see. Charessa had another question in the chat. How do we as journalists reassure our readers that what we're writing and posting is true and non-malicious? I think it's a lot about that transparency in a lot of ways. It's, showing how we are handling errors when they're made, which, they're inevitable. We're humans. Um, Being transparent about our journalistic standards, you know, being upfront about the conversations we have in the newsroom if we're asked, right? Like I was talking earlier at the very beginning about how last week was a weird news week for us. And there was the professor who was caught doing some questionable things on campus. We felt we had to write about that as a huge campus story. And we did have some people ask us, why we wrote about it and why we took the approach that we did. And we had some really, really thoughtful discussions about that in the newsroom. And then we were able to kind of share that with the readers who inquired and just say, like, this is why we decided to do this. This is why we decided to take this approach. It's kind of like making sure that we understand why something is newsworthy and then being able to explain that and being willing to explain it. Like, it's a kind of like fraught atmosphere right now where anybody can be criticized for any little thing. But I still think that the best course for journalists is to be as transparent as possible about like why we came to the conclusions that we did, who we talked to. And like the thing is too, if you're reading a well-researched and thorough and thoughtful, article, you can see the work that went into it. You can see who they talked to, why they talk to them. Like you can follow the thread. If you're not able to follow that thread, I think that's a red flag. But like in any, news story that we're producing at the Daily Egyptian, you can easily see like point A to point B. At least that's the hope, right? Like they talk to this person who knows about this. They talk to this person who knows about this. It's like there's a model called like conversation tables where it's like, okay, so the issue is the table, right? You can imagine like a round table, and then who's sitting at that table? Those are the people we need to talk to, right? So if we have an issue about, um, you know, water in a community, water source in the community. So who do you want to talk to? You want to talk to the people in the community who drink the water, the people who treat the water, the people who pay for the treatment of the water, the city council who oversees that, makes the laws about it. So like this is the process we're going through, and any story should reflect that that process has been done.
So did you were saying on that story about the professor no longer in the School of Medicine, did you would explain to people who called in uh, what you had done? Did the Daily Egyptian write anything about how it decided how to handle the story? Like
We
how
haven't written anything. No, we haven't written anything. I think that the original story addressed some points of curiosity, perhaps. We took care to identify where the story came from, which was from a partisan social media account. Um, we took care to explain who's behind that account, what their purpose is, to kind of help readers get some context. We were careful about saying these are, the story itself kind of shows some of that. We were careful to say, this is what we know, this is what we kind of don't know and can't verify through this screenshot on a social media post, right? This is what we're talking about. Um, Here's how the school handled it, so I feel like we were pretty transparent in the story. If you read the story, you can see some of the work that we did and some of the thought that went into it. We have not written anything about why we did it, how we did it, but yeah, it's been more of a question, from some people in our community who are, maybe just curious, concerned, um, maybe feeling like it gave it too much weight to have a big story about it, but explaining like this is our process for like determining whether something is newsworthy, and this absolutely was. And we tried to give as much context as possible to like why this came up now, how it came up. So
Well, I mean, it's a volatile time, right? There's pulling of federal funding with the DEI and everything. So, I mean,
yeah,
it could have put SIU at risk. I mean,
yeah,
but
yeah, it
oh,
absolutely can. It absolutely could have. And that's something that our reporters tried to ask the administration about, but they did not want to talk to us about that.
oh, yeah. I mean, that would have been my big question because there's like
Yep.
lawsuits right now going on with a few schools.
Yep.
And then like whether or not you're going to continue like those DEI pride things after that effect. But I wanted to ask, I guess, I mean, obviously we don't know the person, but if was he was posting on Blue Sky, was it in with like an OnlyFans, or was that never discovered?
Let's see. I think our reporter said they found a Reddit account, a Blue Sky account, an X account, and something that was paywalled. So I think that was OnlyFans.
All
It's
right.
it's in our story what he was able to independently find. I mean, that's the thing too. Like the only thing that went in our story was the stuff that our reporter was able to independently verify. Like we did not just take libs of TikTok at their word, right? And when we did, we explained, they posted these screenshots. It's not clear how they got them. It's not clear when they got them. This appears to be this person, but he did not say it's him. The administration did not say it's him. Like we were really careful about how we talked about that, just to be like fully transparent about what we know and also like what we don't know for sure, but what, appears to be true. So, um,
Yeah, interesting story.
certainly, yeah.
Other
Oh,
question. Go ahead.
no, I mean, I'm interested in the algorithm stuff. I mean, with
Yeah.
kids and everything, right? I mean, there's not even like, if you think about YouTube Kids, it's not even kid friendly, as much as they want to say it is. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the most fascinating things that we can talk about when it comes to media literacy, when it comes to the media landscape, excuse me. Yeah, it's like I said, it's in everything. It's in everything. And unless we like live in a cabin in the woods and have absolutely no internet or no device, like
so
you just gotta know it's there.
how do you fight partisan? Because I mean, everyone has their own personal Twitter or whatever they use now, and obviously they do engage with partisan politics. So when
Yeah.
things come, like when people come looking into the program and they start looking up people on their Twitter accounts, do you have like a blanket media policy for individuals saying don't engage with this, don't engage with that, review your stuff? Because there's a
Yep.
lot of like journalists, I'm going to put quotes, I mean, they do write for people who do very engage in partisan politics, but then try and write nonpartisan on their,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Right. That's a really great question. We do have a policy internally that all of our staff, is familiar with that kind of gives us a guide about how we engage on social media, how we engage in political campaigns and things like that. It's really, really similar to what you would find working at a news organization. And I've seen a spectrum of like journalists and how they handle different things. I will say that for me, for my entire journalistic career, I have just stayed away from posting anything publicly that's about politics. I vote in every single election, and I don't tell anybody what I did behind, that ballot box curtain. And because, and here's the thing too, journalists, everybody, every human being comes to every situation with a history, their own context, their own bias, right? Being free from bias is in my opinion, like as a journalist, is a goal to strive for, but a perfection that can probably never be fully reached because we are people, and we have ideas. That's why, like I said, journalism is collaborative. So it's important to have those checks and balances. But um, yeah, I avoid engaging at all costs because I know as a journalist and in my line of work, working for a nonpartisan organization, uh, I really need to be kind of a blank slate as much as possible. If you look at my social media, you'll see my dog and you'll see my trivia night, but that's about it. I post about things going on around town. Uh, but I am not, advertising how I feel about politics just because it would be a detriment to my work. It may prevent somebody from wanting to talk to me. It may prevent an organization from wanting to work with me. And I just can't take that risk. Now, if I want to vent about it, I have a very small safe senders list. And this is what I tell the Daily Egyptian students too. You have your safe senders or your safe people that you talk to and call and you vent, because you got to do that. But we got to be careful about who we talk to and what we say because in 10 years from now, you just never know what's going to come back and bite you in the ass. And better safe than sorry. That is my philosophy. So, I find it's more important to carry myself with the ethics and values, that are central to journalism, do no harm, be fair, um, than it is to say, I don't like this politician or I do like this guy or whatever.
Before you were around at the Daily Egyptian, we had some controversy over students on their Daily Egyptian journalists on their social media saying either Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, and that I mean we had one former editor who said Black Lives Matter, and another former editor that said Blue Lives Matter, and the Black Lives Matter folks wanted to discipline the Blue Lives Matter person. So it was yeah, I don't know that we ended up with a hard and fast policy. Is there a hard and fast policy on what a person on Daily Egyptian should do in that situation?
Yeah, this actually dovetails really well with the question that just came through on the chat. Does that mean you don't engage in any activism? Should we or should we not be anonymous with that activism? I don't. I grew up in a very, very activist household. My mother has been to jail several times for her various activist activities. In fact, my very first day at the Southern Illinoisan on the AP Wire, I found a photo of my mother being arrested in Ferguson. So I come from a long history of activists, but I myself, since I was a kid, have not engaged. Since I basically decided that journalism was going to be my path, I have not engaged. I think that it is, like I said, it's really important as journalists to carry ourselves forward with those values, with that integrity, with that ethical framework of serving. Like we need our information to reach as many people as possible. And if my, holding a sign somewhere is going to prevent that, it's not worth it. I think as journalists, we have a lot of power in sharing information, sharing credible information, doing the legwork, and part of that is to just kind of stay out of it. I have a lot of opinions. Like all my close friends and my family would say I'm a very opinionated, headstrong person, but at work, you know, you got to leave it at the door because it's important for us to be as fair as possible and to not, rule anybody out. Like we talked about filter bubbles a little bit, algorithms, how things are becoming so polarized. As a community newspaper, as a community journalist, we need everybody in this community to come and read what we have to say because the information on our pages is not biased. It's about politics because that's really important. to how we vote, to how we understand our communities, but it's not, necessarily engaging on one side or another. We need as many people as possible to feel like they have a seat at this table and to get this information from us and share information with us. That's the other thing. Like we depend on our community talking to us. And if we say something that pisses off Terry Bryant or say something that pisses off JB Pritzker, are they going to want to talk to us? And these are people who we really need to talk to us. So we got to be careful. And I think that that doesn't mean not holding power to account because I've absolutely pissed off Terry Bryant, just for the record. But, it was not because of my differing political opinion from her, but about, you know, holding her accountable as an elected representative. That is fine. It has to come from a fact-based, well-researched, balanced place, right? So yeah, for me, like as much as I grew up with activism and it's kind of in my blood, like you will not see me holding a sign, you will not see a yard sign, you will not see a bumper sticker or a flag or anything around me. I feel that my work is just it's just too important to jeopardize with a button or a bumper sticker. So I'm good with it.
And I agree with Alee on that. I mean, I think I've never, and my wife, who's also a journalist, has we've never put any kind of a political sign on our car or on our house. And most news organizations have codes of conduct that say if you do that, you can't write about the
Yeah.
politics of the political campaign. I agree with those kinds of codes of conduct. There was a big sort of public national argument between two big journalists, Bill Keller, about 10 years ago, between Bill Keller, who was then the executive editor of the New York Times, and Glenn Greenwald, who was the Guardian reporter who disclosed the Edward Snowden NSA, that the NSA was collecting everybody's cell phone metadata. And Glenn Greenwald is an activist journalist and says he's going to put his opinions in. He thinks that's the way to do things because people want to know where you're coming from. And Bill Keller says, don't journalists shouldn't do that and should be make sure they're presenting all sides and that they do not they shouldn't think that they have all the answers. Like if you've ever seen Glenn Greenwald speak, you'll know
Yeah.
he does. And so I come down and I've got links to these back and forth debates between the two on the syllabus and the ethics section. But it's a it's a I mean it's still in well around 2020 the George Floyd period of time and the racial reckoning that was supposed to occur but didn't occur. This was really sort of a big issue. A large number of young reporters on the New York Times in particular, but in other big papers as well, were very much pushing for a more kind of activist approach to journalism. And so it's a good question, sure. But I'm with Alee. People have to be able to believe us.
Yeah. Everybody, as much as possible. Yeah.
Other
Okay.
questions?
I think
You probably need to go, huh?
I do. I do. Thank you so much for
Thank
having me.
you.
And
This
yeah,
is
if any
great.
students here are interested in Daily Egyptian or anything else, feel free to contact me. I put my email in the chat. So yeah, love to hear from y'all.
Thank you very much. Thanks for.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.
So, do any of you have some comments on our discussion or additional things to say about this?
Well, I just thought it was definitely a very thorough presentation that she
Yeah,
gave.
she's good.
Yeah. And she pretty much went over all the strategies of how to detect things.
Yeah, like a couple of you, I would be maybe I'll even talk to her about this. I'd be
Yeah.
interested in what her presentation on algorithms looks like.
Uh-huh.
That could be pretty interesting. Maybe I can wangle a way to get her back for that, because that's certainly something I don't understand the ins and outs of, and if she's got a presentation about it, it might be really good for us to look at.
I'd be
Uh,
interested because I want to know how you fight the algorithm as like a nonpartisan, let's say journalist or person, right? Because you need to
yeah,
appease something at some point in this day and age.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, like one thing on TikTok, I do manage to watch both conservative and liberal commentary enough that I get both, but I sure get a lot more liberal content. And I'd like to have a little more balance in what I get. I guess just because of my own behavior and maybe staying on the liberal things that are fed me more than a longer time than the conservative things. But I really don't. I mean, I really don't understand all that. The other thing I don't, and I meant to ask her this question, ask Alee this question, is that I tend to just like ignore the AI generated Google answer. I mean, because I don't trust it right off the top. And you know, is my skepticism about that warranted, or is that giving me what is really what might be the best answer? I mean, I know it used to be that professors would say you can't use Wikipedia as a source, but actually Wikipedia is oftentimes the most reliable place to go to get information in a quick period of time. So I definitely find Wikipedia to be a pretty reliable source of information. Um, Although, you know, there are certainly criticisms such as a lot of the information comes from white males. But at any rate, um, those are things that are really interesting.
And even I know that like the AI, like the chat GBT or whatever, it has the capability now. I don't think it used to, but now it can give you references um to online references.
I find that I've used like Grok and ChatGPT and Otter AI. There's the there's it's like verbiage differences. Like they'll still kind of come to the same conclusion, but they pick and choose which words they want to use for things. They're not so it's really weird. But they do provide sources from what I've noticed. But I mean, so does what's the one that's on Edge? Um, Copilot does the same. But I mean, it's just taking stuff from articles,
Yeah,
and a lot of it's out. It can be out of context too.
right.
I was gonna ask her that how she like. There was that clip a while ago where it was just very obviously misinformation. They just cut the person short. Like it was like this long clip of them explaining something, and it really like filled a narrative for a specific party, and then they just cut the clip right there.
Right.
Whereas they went on to like further elaborate on a more liberal side.
Well, you know, there's a one controversial element. It goes back to the election campaign, the 60 Minutes interview of Kamala Harris. You know, the 60 Minutes, which is in general a very, uh, from my from from what I've seen, a very um, high quality journalism outlet. So they asked both Trump and Harris to sit down for an interview. Harris did, and Trump refused. And then Harris, in her interview, was asked a question about that related to the Middle East and Gaza, and she gave a longish answer that sort of wound around a couple of different places, and the Trump campaign filed an FCC complaint saying that CBS had distorted their broadcast of her answer because they'd use part of the answer on 60 Minutes and part of it on a promo on This Morning, I guess, This Morning America, is that a CBS program? It's some sort of promo for the 60-minute interview. They used a different part of the answer. And of course, it's a standard practice to do some editing help make an answer that's understandable to the listener or to the reader. Similarly, if you've had a long interview with a politician, you don't use every unless you're publishing a transcript, you don't use everything that they say. You try to use stuff that's going to be understandable. Um, so that was also a controversial thing that happened. Any other comments? Did anybody have time to read that piece I sent you on sort of how insular the United States is and how to a certain extent we're cutting ourselves off with these getting rid of USAID and Radio Free Europe and Voice of America and
Yeah, I read it before, like the during all my life, I'm 68, right? That piece.
yeah, that one, right?
Yeah. I found it interesting. I mean, there he talks about like being insulary, and I felt this way a little bit for about journalism for a moment. It seems like they're telling people how to view the world, or I don't know really how to describe it, but like I thought it was like part of the media literacy thing, where it's like I don't know how to describe it, but it was an interesting piece. I mean, it talks on tariffs, and a few other things, and then Trump's obsession with like Denmark taking Greenland, and then the Panama Canal, which would, yeah, it was interesting.
All sort of like insular, America first, isolationist kinds of, well, maybe not isolationist, but because they're pretty aggressive.
Yeah, he's
Re-
being a lot more aggressive than he was in 2016. I mean, shutting down Voice of America and Radio Free Europe is really interesting.
I mean, I just actually asked a friend of mine to write a piece about uh, soft power, which this column touches on. I mean, how I think a lot of the American people don't really understand how important soft power like Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, USAID, um, and programs like, say, the Fulbright Fellowship and Scholarship Program that sends Americans overseas and brings people from overseas to America. They don't realize how important those soft power aspects of United States policy are, even as they're being cut back on.
I mean, even challenging like right the open the not the territorial waters but the open seas like between Taiwan and China, correct? What is it, 5 miles? Just like always, just perpetually selling carrier fleet through it just ensures that there's free trade that can travel through those seas as
Right,
well.
right. Good. That's a good point. Um,
Um, and then now there's a destroyer, right? Two destroyers in the Gulf of America, and then the talk of the Roosevelt Reservation being expanded into a military base so that it can detain immigrants or not immigrants,
right.
illegals.
Illegals, right. Yeah. So, okay. Anybody have anything else? We're about at our 2 hours. We're going to have looking forward. So we're moving on to our. If you haven't gotten your final version of your second article, get it into me as soon as you can. Be thinking about your third piece. And remember, there's a fourth down the road that's where I'm looking for a little more in-depth reporting. So we have a third and fourth ahead. Jackie Spinner, the former Daily Egyptian editor who was
Mhm.
Baghdad bureau chief of the Washington Post, the Columbia College professor now, is going to be talking to us the first Thursday in April. So that's 2 weeks from today. A week from today, we're going to talk about some of the legal First Amendment issues. One of the announcements has a number of attachments um, on important First Amendment legal cases. I'm going to want you to make sure you understand the Pentagon Papers case and the New York Times versus Sullivan and some others. I'll go into a little more detail in the note I send you with the
So,
link.
so, so I have a quick question about the third piece.
Sure.
So, yeah, so I know that you kind of want us to explore different mediums of writing, and I've explored two different mediums in the previous pieces. But as we're getting down to these last two, do you have any advice on how to pick the uh different mediums than we've already done, given that we've already done two?
No, the medium choice is your own. If somebody wants to do a PR, a PR news release for all four things, I'm okay with that. I
Uh-huh.
don't care what. I just want you to know you can use any kind of medium, news article, opinion piece,
Right.
social media posts,
Hmm.
photo story, blog. I mean, all those are open to you, but I'm not insisting that you use multiple ones, nor am I insisting that that you use a variety of them. It's fine with me if you want to if you want to write all news stories, or if you want to have
Yeah.
everything be a blog. Fine with me.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody Anything they want to run past me on the third story idea that they want to get any advice on?
I'm having trouble writing my third. I think my interview went wrong though. I finally got in touch with my friend about being a mother and at war. I found some research pieces from around that 2011 time frame,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know.
So you had the interview.
Hmm.
Um, was it, I mean,
It went well. I just, how do I describe it? I want to add more, I guess, news to it and less opinion because like it's difficult. There's stories to pull from, but it feels like I'm just writing this person's story and less reporting like the news on it, if that makes sense.
yeah. Well, I mean, it might be that. So, one form of journalism is a profile story on a particular person. We are delving into it and into one person's life in a much greater detail. Uh, Oftentimes, this is a person who's interesting because they illustrate something that has a broader sort of a broader meaning or broader significance. Oftentimes, let's say the person you interview had, felt like she was discriminated against at some point or another. I mean, there are all sorts of statistics out there about discrimination against women in the military. I mean, you can bring some broader facts to bear as you write her story, facts that are established and that that might illustrate something she's talking about. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, that does. It's just getting to be long
Yeah.
too.
Don't worry about I mean, don't worry about the length. It doesn't have to be real long, but I'm willing to read something that, the if it ends up 1,500 words or something, and maybe then we use that as your last piece. That's the more in-depth one, and you can do a shorter one to come back to that for the third one. Uh, so if this was going long, go with it if you think it's interesting.
Okay.
Okay. All right. See you next week. Thanks, everybody.